In times when Mr. Harvey was too ill to record his broadcasts, he turned that task over to the creator and sole writer of the rest of the story. Here's Paul Harvey, Jr.
Now, the rest of the story. In 1752, during the calm before our great American storm, the spiritual and social vortex of the city of Philadelphia was Christ Church. The roster of regular attendees reads like the index of an American history book. Names like Washington, Adams, Franklin, Lafayette, Morris, and Hopkinson, and Rush, and Ross, and Penn. The building itself, a stunning confluence of Georgian architecture and Baroque ornamentation, was a designer's dream, except for one thing. Christ Church had no steeple. Well, now, in any other place at any other time, such a discrepancy might have been overlooked. The building was already a quarter of a century old, and it looked fine the way it was. But the Philadelphia of 1752 was a city riding the crest of its own vibrancy. The town was expanding, was coming to life physically and economically, and there were more people, more services available than ever before. So as a byproduct of that blossoming civic consciousness, it was decided by the distinguished members that Christ Church would have a steeple with a, quote, ring of bells. Naturally, a church committee convened. Benjamin Franklin was on that committee, and to meet the construction cost of the new steeple, a bold measure was agreed upon. Even though surely many members would object on moral grounds, the committee decided to organize a lottery. Ben Franklin was perhaps the most active member of what became the Lottery Committee. In an effort to sell the idea, he told the other members how much the church meant to him and how much more beautiful a steeple would make Philadelphia's skyline. However, the main reason Ben Franklin wanted that steeple built, the reason he dared not divulge even to his fellow committee members, well, I wonder if you could guess what that was. Anyway, in the wake of many pious objections, Ben Franklin worked hard to promote what was then being called the Philadelphia Steeple Lottery. But cost estimates for the steeple construction ranged well over £2,000. Remember, it was still British money at the time. And as the months passed, it became evident that a second lottery would be required. Well, before you know it, it's 1753. Some folks are saying, hey, this is too much trouble, but Ben Franklin vigorously hung in there. And it's only looking back on it that we can see Ben's ulterior motive. Look, in 1749, Franklin summarized his findings on electricity. And in 1750, he proposed a lightning experiment to be conducted from a sentry box in a high tower or a steeple. Then the following year, the Royal Society in London took a look at Ben's treatise on electricity, but they deemed it unworthy of publication. So, by 1752, Ben Franklin was desperate to prove his theories. And, of course, 1752 was the year of the Philadelphia Steeple Lottery. But the fundraising project and subsequent construction of the steeple would take longer than Ben had imagined. So, out of necessity, he turned to another invention. Christ Church eventually got its steeple, but by then, in order to verify his lightning electricity theories, Ben Franklin decided instead to go fly a kite. Only now, you know the rest of the story.
And now, the rest of the story. Benjamin Franklin has always been one of my favorite founding fathers to research. Just when you think you've learned all there is to know about him, well, you find another layer to explore. And the Christ Steeple Lottery is just another of those layers. Christ Church was founded in 1695 as a condition of William Penn's charter. You see, William Penn's father, Sir William Penn, was an admiral in the English Navy and a politician. He served with distinction in the First English Civil War, as well as the First and Second Anglo-Dutch Wars. When he returned home on leave in March 1651, it was the first time in over a year that he'd set foot on dry ground, on the shore. In December 1658, he was knighted by Henry Cromwell, son of Oliver Cromwell. Now, if you'll remember, Oliver Cromwell was an English politician and leading advocate for the execution of King Charles I, an execution which took place in January 1649. His execution led to the establishment of the Commonwealth of England, and Oliver Cromwell ruled as a Lord Protectorate from December 1653 until his death 5 years later. Sir William Penn was knighted 3 months after Oliver Cromwell's death. 2 years later, in May 1660, Sir Admiral William Penn was on the ship which transported Charles II, son of executed King Charles I, back to England, and the Stuart monarchy was restored soon thereafter. In that same year, Sir Admiral William Penn was elected as a member of Parliament, but he still actively served in the Royal Navy. Sir William Penn was wealthy and owned estates in England and Ireland. After the Restoration, King Charles II needed money to resupply his navy, so he turned to Sir William Penn. Sir William Penn loaned King Charles II 16,000 British pounds sterling. Now, that's just over $2 million in today's money. Sir William Penn died in 1670 without ever collecting that king's outstanding debt. William Penn, son of the admiral, inherited all of his father's property and learned of the king's outstanding loan. Well, but rather than accepting the money, which the king did not have anyway, William Penn asked for a land grant in North America from the king. In March 1681, they settled on a deal in which William received a swath of unexplored wilderness in North America. Now, the land just needed a name. At first glance, it would appear that the naming of the land, Pennsylvania, was some sort of ego trip, but that wasn't the case at all. William suggested the name New Wales, but the king said it would be named Pennsylvania out of respect in honor of William's father, Sir Admiral William Penn. Pennsylvania is a combination of Sir Admiral William Penn's last name and the word Sylvania, which derived from the Latin word silva, which translates to forest. The whole land at that time was covered in trees. A stipulation in the charter stated that the authority over Pennsylvania would continue down the family line. Now, Benjamin Franklin and his political allies tried to convince King George III to abolish the Penn family's control over Pennsylvania some 80 years later, but they failed. And so it continued until the outbreak of the American Revolution. You see, the Treaty of Paris of 1783 nullified the charter, and Pennsylvania became a state in the independent United States of America. Now back to Christ Church in Philadelphia. Members of the Continental Congress worshiped in the church during the American Revolution, as did Presidents George Washington and John Adams in the first decade of the newly established republic. Members of the church during and immediately following the Revolution included William Penn's grandson, John Penn, seamstress Betsy Ross, signers of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, including Robert Morris, Benjamin Rush, and Francis Hopkinson, and of course Benjamin Franklin. The church was built in 1744. It was in 1752 that Benjamin Franklin organized the lottery to raise money for the steeple. Take a look at this newspaper article from the Pennsylvania Gazette from November the 2nd, 1752. I find it interesting that they openly call this a scheme of a lottery. Today, using those words, lottery and scheme, in the same sentence would automatically make us think that it was a scam. But I guess scams weren't as prevalent in the 1750s. Here's how the lottery scheme worked. 13 managers, one of which was Benjamin Franklin, sold lottery tickets for 4 pieces of 8 each. The colonists did not mint currency at the time, and the most common currency in the colonies was not British pounds, but the Spanish dollar, what the English called pieces of 8. That's why it shows up in this article. Benjamin Franklin and his fellow managers hoped to sell 4,500 tickets by March the 1st, 1753, the date the prizes were drawn. There were a total of 1,668 prizes and 2,832 non-winning tickets, what they called blanks. One grand prize winner would get 1,500 pieces of 8. Wow. Take a look at the article and you can see the breakdown of all the prizes. When all was said and done, if all the tickets sold, Christ Church would have nearly 12,000 pieces of 8 to go toward the construction of the steeple. In this episode, Paul Harvey Jr. explained that there were 2 lotteries to raise money for the steeple. Now, at first glance, we would think this was done because they failed to sell enough lottery tickets the first time around. But having 2 lotteries was the plan all along. Take a look at this article, which detailed the supplement to the Philadelphia Steeple Lottery. The first lottery was never meant to raise the whole amount all in one go. They concluded that it would be easier to raise the sum in 2 lotteries rather than 1, and they were afraid to have so much cash at one time out of circulation. There was a limited amount of coinage in the colonies. Also, they hoped the winners would buy more lottery tickets, and it would give people who did not win in the first lottery another chance. Sale of tickets in the second lottery began on March the 5th, 4 days after the first lottery ended. The breakdown of prizes was not as generous as they were in the first lottery, but still pretty good. You can see the breakdown in this article from the Pennsylvania Gazette, March 6, 1753. After a couple of postponements, the drawing was held on May 30th, 1753. It is likely that they postponed the drawing to sell all the tickets. Now, this was big news. The winning numbers were published on the front page of the Pennsylvania Journal and Weekly Advertiser. Took up the entire first page. When the church finally raised enough money, they hired Scottish-born American architect Robert Smith to build the steeple. Robert Smith built several other notable buildings in Philadelphia, such as Carpenter's Hall, St. Peter's Episcopal Church, and the Walnut Street Prison. Robert Smith completed the steeple in 1755, and for 56 years, the steeple atop Christ Church made it the tallest structure in North America. You can visit Christ Church in Philadelphia today. It's part of the Independence National Historical Park. The church hosts daily historical talks and tours, but it's still an active Episcopal church. So, did Benjamin Franklin really have an ulterior motive with this steeple lottery? Was he hoping to use the church steeple in his experiment? Well, there's just one problem with this theory. By all credible accounts, Benjamin Franklin performed his now famous kite experiment in June 1752, 5 months before the announcement of the first steeple lottery. I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching. And now you know the rest of the story.